The sound of rushing water echoed through our master bathroom like a funeral bell. I stood in the doorway, watching my wife Nessa stare down at the toilet bowl where her wedding ring had just disappeared into the municipal sewage system of suburban Cleveland. "Oops," she said, not looking at me. Her voice carried all the emotion of someone commenting on spilled coffee. "That was an accident." I didn't raise my voice. After 15 years of marriage, I'd learned that volume rarely improved communication. Instead, I leaned against the doorframe and watched her face in the bathroom mirror. She was still beautiful at 38, still had that magnetic quality that drew people to her at parties and work functions. But something had shifted in recent months. The way she held herself, the careful distance she maintained even in our own home. "You won't need it after your last trip with your ex," I said calmly. For the first time since the ring went down, she looked directly at me. Her green eyes searched my face for signs of anger, confusion, hurt. She found none of those things. What she found was something that made her take a small step backward. "Keaton, what are you talking about?" I smiled. Not the warm smile she'd fallen in love with during our college years, but something cooler, more calculated. "Mark Vance, real estate agent, lives in that overpriced downtown loft on East 4th Street, the one with the terrible parking situation." Her face went pale beneath her carefully applied makeup. "I don't know what you think you know, but I know you've been using our joint credit card to book hotel rooms when you're supposed to be at HR conferences. I know about the transfers from our savings account to cover his lease payments. I know about the phone calls at midnight when you think I'm asleep." I pushed off from the doorframe and walked past her toward our bedroom. "I know about a lot of things, Nessa." She followed me, her bare feet silent on the hardwood floor. "You've been spying on me." "I've been paying attention. There's a difference." I pulled my suitcase from the closet and set it on our bed. The same bed where she'd been increasingly distant, always finding excuses to stay up late or wake up early. "Your parents will be here in 20 minutes. We should finish packing for this family trip. Keaton, we need to talk about this." "No, we really don't." I folded a shirt with mechanical precision. "You flushed your wedding ring down the toilet and called it an accident. That tells me everything I need to know about where your head is right now." She sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly looking smaller than her usual commanding presence. "It really was an accident. I was taking it off to put on lotion, and it slipped." I stopped packing and looked at her. Really looked at her. The woman I'd married had been spontaneous and passionate, but she'd never been careless with things that mattered to her. She still had every piece of jewelry her grandmother had left her, still kept ticket stubs from movies we'd seen on our first dates. Nessa Marin didn't accidentally lose things she valued. "The lotion bottle is still sealed," I said, nodding toward the bathroom counter. "And you were fully dressed when you took the ring off." The silence stretched between us like a canyon. Outside, I could hear our neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, starting her leaf blower, the suburban symphony of a Saturday morning in October. Normal sounds for what was about to become a very abnormal weekend. "My parents don't need to know about any of this," she said finally. "About what? About Mark? About the money you've been moving around? About the fact that you just flushed your wedding ring down the toilet?" I zipped up my suitcase. "Or about the fact that I've known about all of it for 3 weeks. That got her attention. 3 weeks? "Since September 28th. That's when you left your laptop open and I saw the email thread with him. The one where you were planning your business trip to Chicago that coincidentally lined up with his real estate conference." I sat down across from her. "I've been waiting to see how far you'd take it." Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text from her father. 5 minutes away. So excited for our family weekend." Nessa's hands were shaking slightly as she read the message. "What are you going to do?" "Right now? I'm going to load our bags in the car, smile at your parents, and drive us all to that lakeside cabin they rented for our family bonding weekend." I stood up and grabbed both suitcases. "After that, we'll see how the weekend unfolds." The doorbell rang downstairs. Walter and Janine Hoffman, arriving precisely on time as they had for every family gathering since Nessa and I had gotten married. They were good people, the kind of parents who still believed their daughter could do no wrong even as she approached 40. They'd raised Nessa to be confident and independent, though somewhere along the way those qualities had morphed into something more self-serving. "Promise me you won't say anything to them this weekend," Nessa said, grabbing my arm as I headed for the stairs. I looked down at her hand on my sleeve, then back at her face. "I promise I won't say anything to them about Mark." She relaxed slightly, not catching the careful wording of my promise. That was always Nessa's weakness. She heard what she wanted to hear. Walter's voice boomed up from the entryway. "Where are my favorite kids?" "Coming, Dad," Nessa called back, her voice instantly bright and cheerful. She was good at that transformation, switching from private anxiety to public charm in seconds. It was one of the things that had made her successful in human resources. I followed her downstairs, watching her hug her parents with genuine warmth. Whatever else was happening in our marriage, she truly loved Walter and Janine. They were in their mid-60s, still spry and enthusiastic about life. Walter had retired from teaching high school history 2 years ago, and Janine had just finished her last semester as a librarian. This weekend trip was supposed to be a celebration of their new freedom and quality time with their daughter and son-in-law. Keaton, Janine wrapped me in one of her signature hugs, the kind that made you feel like you were the most important person in her world. You look thin. Is Nessa feeding you? She's been busy with work, I said, accepting Walter's firm handshake. Lots of travel lately. Nessa shot me a warning look, but I kept my expression neutral. Well, this weekend is about relaxation, Walter announced. No work talk, no stress, just family time at the lake. Sounds perfect, I agreed. Let me get our bags in the car. As I loaded the suitcases into the trunk of my Honda Pilot, I pulled out my phone and made a small change to our GPS route. Instead of taking the direct highway to the lake, we'd be making a slight detour. Nothing dramatic, just a small adjustment that would add about 30 minutes to our drive time. 30 minutes would be enough. Nessa climbed into the passenger seat while her parents settled in the back, chattering about the cabin amenities and the weather forecast. Perfect autumn weekend, they said. Ideal for hiking and sitting by the fire. Ready for a memorable weekend? I asked, starting the engine. Absolutely, Walter said from the back seat. Nessa buckled her seatbelt and stared straight ahead. Can't wait. As we pulled out of our driveway, I reached for my phone and composed 2 messages. The first was an email to the property management company that handled Mark's loft building. The second was a text to Mark himself. I didn't send them immediately. Instead, I waited until we were 15 minutes down the road, until Nessa had relaxed into conversation with her parents about their retirement plans and the book club Janine had joined. Then I hit send on both messages. The email was simple and direct. This is to inform you that the secondary leaseholder for Unit 4B will no longer have access to the property effective immediately. Please change the access codes and retrieve any spare keys. The primary leaseholder will be in contact regarding termination procedures. The text to Mark was even simpler. The apartment is no longer available. Find other accommodations. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and focused on driving. In the passenger seat, Nessa was laughing at something her father had said about his attempts to learn how to use streaming services. She had no idea that her carefully constructed backup plan was already falling apart. Oh, I almost forgot, she said, pulling out her own phone. I need to check in with the office about that conference next week. What conference? Janine asked. Chicago, big HR summit. Very important for my career development. Nessa's fingers moved across her phone screen. I'll probably need to extend the trip by a day or two to attend all the sessions. I glanced at her in my peripheral vision. Even now, even after everything, she was still building the lie, still planning her next meeting with Mark. That's wonderful, honey, Walter said. Your dedication to professional growth has always impressed me. Thanks, Dad. Her phone buzzed with an incoming call. She glanced at the screen and her face went tight. I need to take this. Work emergency. But I could see the caller ID from where I sat. It wasn't work, it was Mark. Hello? She answered, her voice carefully professional. I couldn't hear his side of the conversation, but I could see Nessa's reflection in the passenger window. Her expression shifted from confusion to alarm to barely controlled panic. I'm sure there's been some mistake, she said. Can you double-check the system? Walter and Janine were discussing the best route for their morning hike, oblivious to the drama playing out in the front seat. No, I understand, Nessa continued. Yes, I'll look into it and call you back. She ended the call and immediately started typing a text message. Everything okay at work? I asked conversationally. Fine, just a minor issue with the conference arrangements. Her fingers were moving rapidly across the screen. Nothing that can't be handled. But I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she kept glancing at her phone waiting for a response that wasn't coming. Mark was probably standing outside his building right now, trying to figure out why his keycard wasn't working and why the front desk was telling him he was no longer authorized to enter. You know what I love about these family trips? Walter said from the back seat. No distractions, just quality time together. Absolutely, I agreed, taking the exit that would add our 30-minute detour. Sometimes it's good to get away from all the usual complications. Nessa's phone buzzed again. Another call from Mark. She declined it and sent another text. Busy day at the office? I asked. It's handled, she said tightly, but it wasn't handled. It was just beginning. As we drove through the rolling hills of rural Ohio, autumn colors blazing on both sides of the highway, I thought about the ring at the bottom of our toilet. Such a small thing, really. A circle of white gold and diamonds that had cost me 2 months' salary when I was 26 and thought I understood what love meant. Nessa had worn that ring for 15 years. Through good times and hard ones, through job changes, losses in the family, and all the ordinary struggles of building a life together. And this morning, she'd let it fall into the toilet as if it meant nothing at all. Oops, she'd said. But there were no accidents in marriage. There were only choices, and Nessa had been making hers for months now, carefully and deliberately. The late-night phone calls, the mysterious expenses, the emotional distance that had grown between us like a slow-spreading infection. I'd been making choices too. The choice to investigate instead of confront, the choice to gather evidence instead of demanding explanations, the choice to plan instead of react, and now the choice to act. My phone sat silent in my pocket, but I knew that 30 miles behind us, Mark Vance was having the worst day of his professional life. By the time we reached the lake cabin, he'd be scrambling to find a hotel room and wondering how his carefully planned weekend with my wife had turned into a logistical nightmare. "Look at that view," Janine said as we crested a hill. The lake spread out below us, mirror bright in the afternoon sun. "Beautiful," Nessa murmured, but she was still staring at her phone. "Sometimes the best views come after the longest journeys," I said, and I meant every word. The lakeside cabin was everything Walter and Janine had promised. Rustic charm with modern amenities, a wraparound deck overlooking the water, and enough space for all of us to spread out comfortably. Under normal circumstances, I would have genuinely enjoyed a weekend here. The October air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of wood smoke from neighboring cabins and the earthy smell of fallen leaves. But these weren't normal circumstances. Nessa had been on her phone almost continuously since we'd arrived 2 hours ago. She'd claimed to be dealing with work issues, but I could see the frustration building in her posture with each unanswered call and ignored text message. Mark wasn't responding to her attempts at communication, and she couldn't figure out why. "Honey, put the phone away," Walter said gently as we sat on the deck watching the sunset. "Whatever it is can wait until Monday." "You're right, Dad." Nessa forced a smile and slipped the phone into her pocket. "I'm sorry. Sometimes I get too caught up in work." Janine poured wine from the bottle they'd brought to celebrate the weekend. "That's the problem with your generation. Always connected, never truly present." "Says the woman who FaceTimes with her book club every Thursday," Walter teased. "That's different. That's social connection, not work stress." I accepted a glass of the wine and settled back in my chair. The conversation flowed around me, comfortable family banter, shared memories, plans for tomorrow's activities. On the surface, everything appeared normal, but I could feel Nessa's anxiety like static electricity in the air. Her phone buzzed. She glanced at it quickly, then looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "I need to make a quick call," she said, standing up. "Work emergency." "Nessa," Walter said with gentle reproach, "it's Saturday evening." "I know, Dad, but this is important. I'll just be a few minutes." She walked to the far end of the deck, out of earshot but still visible. I watched her pace back and forth as she spoke, her free hand gesturing emphatically. Even from a distance, I could tell the conversation wasn't going well. "She works too hard," Janine said, following my gaze. "She's very dedicated," I agreed. "Maybe too dedicated. When was the last time you two took a real vacation? Just the two of you?" I thought about it. "Last summer, we went to that resort in North Carolina." "That was over a year ago," Walter pointed out. "You both need to make more time for each other." If only it were that simple. If only the problem was just busy schedules and competing priorities. But the distance between Nessa and me had nothing to do with work demands and everything to do with the choices she'd been making in her personal life. "You're probably right," I said. "Maybe we should plan something for the spring." Nessa returned to the group, her face flushed with frustration. "Sorry about that. Crisis averted." "Good," Walter said. "Now we can focus on family time." But Nessa's phone buzzed again almost immediately. She glanced at it, and I saw her face go pale. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Fine, just fine." She tucked the phone away without responding to whatever message she'd received. I had a pretty good idea what that message contained. Mark had probably figured out by now that his apartment situation wasn't a simple administrative error. He was likely demanding explanations, looking for someone to blame. And Nessa was realizing that her carefully planned Chicago trip was falling apart before it had even begun. "Who wants to start a fire?" Walter asked, rubbing his hands together. I brought marshmallows. "I'll help," I offered, grateful for the distraction. As Walter and I gathered wood from the cabin's supply, He kept up a steady stream of conversation about retirement life, his new hobby of woodworking, and his plans to travel with Janine. He was a good man, the kind of father-in-law who'd always treated me like a son, rather than an intruder in his family. "Can I ask you something, Keaton?" he said as we stacked logs in the fire pit. "Of course. Is everything okay between you and Nessa? She seems tense lately." I paused in my work, considering how to answer. Walter deserved honesty, but this wasn't the time or place for the full truth. "Marriage is complicated," I said finally. "We're working through some things." He nodded thoughtfully. "Janine and I went through a rough patch in our early 40s. Work stress, raising a teenager, aging parents. It felt like we were ships passing in the night." "How did you get through it?" "Communication, patience, and remembering why we fell in love in the first place." He struck a match and lit the kindling. "Sometimes you have to fight for your marriage, even when it feels easier to give up." The fire caught quickly, flames dancing upward into the darkening sky. I thought about Walter's words as we rejoined the women on the deck. Fight for your marriage. But what happened when one person was fighting to save it, while the other was actively working to destroy it? Nessa's phone buzzed again. This time she didn't even look at it. "A popular night," I observed. "Just work stuff. I'll deal with it tomorrow." But I could see her hands trembling slightly as she reached for her wine glass. Whatever messages she was receiving, they weren't making her happy. We spent the next hour around the fire, roasting marshmallows and sharing stories from Nessa's childhood. Walter told embarrassing tales about her teenage years, while Janine shared memories of family vacations and holiday traditions. It was the kind of evening that should have been perfect. Family bonding, beautiful setting, no outside pressures, except for the phone that kept buzzing in Nessa's pocket. "I think I'm going to turn in early," she announced around 9 o'clock. "The drive tired me out more than I expected." "Good idea," Janine said. "We have a big day of hiking planned for tomorrow." Nessa kissed her parents goodnight and headed inside. I waited a few minutes, then followed her into the cabin. I found her in our bedroom, sitting on the edge of the bed with her phone pressed to her ear. She was speaking in urgent whispers, but I caught enough to understand the situation. "I don't know what happened. Yes, I'm sure. No, I can't get away tonight, because I'm with my family. I understand you're frustrated, but this isn't my fault." She noticed me in the doorway and quickly ended the call. "Work again?" I asked. "Conference coordinator. There's been some mix-up with the hotel reservations." "That's unfortunate." She studied my face carefully. "You don't seem surprised." "Should I be? You've been dealing with work problems all evening." "Keaton, what did you do?" I sat down in the chair across from her, the same position we'd been in this morning when she'd flushed her wedding ring down the toilet. It felt like a lifetime ago. "I didn't do anything illegal," I said carefully. "I didn't break any laws or hurt anyone." "But you did something." "I exercised my rights as a joint account holder and primary lease signer on certain financial arrangements." Her face went white. "What does that mean?" "It means that your Chicago trip is going to be more complicated than you planned." She stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her mind working, trying to figure out exactly what I knew and what I'd done about it. "The apartment," she said finally. "Among other things. You can't just—" "Actually, I can. My name was on the lease as a co-signer. My credit card was being used for the payments. Legally, I had every right to terminate those arrangements." Nessa stood up and began pacing the small bedroom. "This is insane. You're acting like a jealous teenager." "Am I? Or am I acting like a husband who's tired of financing his wife's affair?" The word hung in the air between us like a challenge. Affair. I'd finally said it out loud. "It's not what you think," she said quietly. "Then tell me what it is." She sat back down on the bed, her shoulders sagging. For a moment, I thought she might actually tell me the truth, explain how it had started, why she'd made the choices she'd made, what she wanted from our marriage going forward. Instead, she said, "Mark is just a friend. We've been catching up, reminiscing about high school. It's innocent. Innocent friends don't need secret apartments." "It's not secret. It's just private. Somewhere we could talk without interruption." "Talk. Yes, talk." I pulled out my phone and scrolled to a screenshot I'd taken 3 weeks ago. "Is this talking?" The image showed a text conversation between Nessa and Mark. Nothing explicitly physical, but certainly nothing innocent. Plans for romantic dinners, discussions about their special connection, complaints about their respective spouses. Nessa's face crumpled as she recognized the evidence. "You've been spying on me." "I've been protecting myself. There's a difference." "By sabotaging my friendships?" "By ending my financial support of your emotional affair." She was quiet for a long time, staring down at her hands. Outside, I could hear Walter and Janine talking quietly on the deck, their voices mixing with the gentle sound of water lapping against the shore. "What happens now?" she asked finally. "That depends on you." "What do you mean?" "I mean you have choices to make, about what you want from this marriage, about whether you're willing to end things with Mark, about whether you want to fight for us or give up entirely. And if I choose to fight? Then we get counseling. We work on our problems together. We rebuild trust and communication and all the things that have been broken between us. And if I don't? Then we end this marriage with whatever dignity we can manage. We divide our assets, tell your parents the truth, and move on with our lives." Nessa was crying now, quiet tears that she wiped away with the back of her hand. "I never meant for it to go this far." "But it did go this far." "I know. So what do you want to do about it?" She was quiet for a long time, and I thought maybe we were finally going to have the honest conversation we should have had months ago. Maybe she'd choose to fight for our marriage. Maybe this weekend could be a turning point instead of an ending. Then her phone buzzed again. She glanced at it automatically, and I saw her face change. Whatever message she'd received had shifted something in her expression. "I need some air," she said, standing up abruptly. "Nessa, just give me a few minutes to think." She walked out of the bedroom, leaving me alone with the sound of her parents' laughter drifting in from the deck. I looked down at my own phone, considering my next move. I had more evidence than just the text messages. Bank records showing cash withdrawals that coincided with Mark's rent payments. Credit card charges at restaurants where Nessa claimed to be attending work functions. A paper trail that painted a clear picture of deception and financial infidelity. But evidence was only useful if you planned to use it. I thought about Walter's advice earlier. Fight for your marriage. But how do you fight for something when the other person has already surrendered? Through the bedroom window, I could see Nessa standing at the edge of the deck, her phone pressed to her ear again. Even from this distance, I could see the tension in her posture, the animated gestures that suggested an intense conversation. She was talking to Mark, I was certain of it. And in that moment, I realized that she'd already made her choice. Not between Mark and me, but between honesty and deception, between fighting for our marriage and protecting her escape plan. I pulled out my phone and opened my email app. The second phase of my plan required more drastic action, but Nessa had just given me all the justification I needed. The message I composed was short and direct. Effective immediately. I am freezing all joint accounts pending a complete financial audit. Any attempts to access shared resources will be considered theft. Please govern yourself accordingly. I sent copies to our bank, our financial advisor, and our attorney. Then I sent one more message, this one to Mark. Ask Nessa about the joint accounts. Ask her how she planned to pay for Chicago. Ask her how much of her own money she's actually been spending on your relationship. By the time Nessa finished her phone call and came back inside, the financial foundation of her affair had completely collapsed. She was about to discover that flushing her wedding ring down the toilet was the least expensive mistake she'd made today. Sunday morning brought gray clouds and the sound of rain pattering against the cabin windows. Walter and Janine had planned a hiking expedition, but the weather forced us to adapt to indoor activities, board games, reading, and the kind of lazy morning that should have been restful. Instead, the atmosphere in the cabin felt like a pressure cooker building toward explosion. Nessa had barely slept. I'd heard her tossing and turning throughout the night, getting up repeatedly to check her phone. When she thought I was asleep, she'd stepped out onto the deck to make whispered phone calls. By morning, she looked exhausted and frantic. "Everything okay, honey?" Janine asked as we sat around the breakfast table. "You look tired." "Just some work stress," Nessa replied, pushing scrambled eggs around her plate without eating. "Nothing I can't handle." But her phone kept buzzing with incoming messages, and each notification made her more agitated. "Maybe you should turn that thing off for the day," Walter suggested gently. "Give yourself a break from work." "I can't. There's a situation that needs my attention." "What kind of situation?" I asked conversationally. Nessa shot me a sharp look. "Budget issues. Some accounts got frozen due to administrative errors." "How frustrating," I said. "I hope that gets resolved quickly." "I'm sure it will." But I could see the panic building behind her carefully controlled expression. The frozen accounts weren't an administrative error, and she knew it. More importantly, Mark knew it too. His angry messages were becoming increasingly frequent and demanding. "I need to step outside and make some calls," Nessa announced, standing up from the table. "In the rain?" Janine asked. "I'll stand under the covered part of the deck." As soon as she left, Walter turned to me with concern. "Is she okay? She seems really stressed about this work thing." She's dealing with some complicated professional relationships, I said carefully. Sometimes those situations require difficult decisions. Through the window, I could see Nessa pacing back and forth under the deck overhang, her phone pressed to her ear. Even from inside, I could tell the conversation was heated. Maybe we should cut the weekend short, Janine suggested, if she's got a real crisis at work. Let's see how the day develops, I said. Sometimes these things resolve themselves. But I knew this particular situation was about to get much worse. Around noon, while Nessa was locked in the bedroom making more phone calls, I received a text message from an unknown number. This is Logan Mitchell, Nessa's friend. We need to talk. Logan. I knew the name from Nessa's social circle, her closest female friend, the one person she confided in about everything. If Logan was reaching out to me directly, it meant she'd learned something that had shaken her faith in Nessa. I stepped out onto the deck to call her back, leaving Walter and Janine playing Scrabble in the living room. Keaton? Logan's voice was tight with emotion. Yes. You wanted to talk? I got your email this morning. The one with all the evidence. I'd sent Logan the complete timeline of Nessa's affair the night before, along with bank records and text message screenshots. If Nessa was going to try to spin this situation to her advantage, I wanted her closest friend to have all the facts. And? I can't believe she did this. I mean, I knew she'd been talking to Mark again, but I thought it was just harmless flirting. I had no idea about the money, the apartment, all of it. What did she tell you about Mark? That you two were having problems. That you'd grown apart, become distant and controlling. She made it sound like she was the victim of a loveless marriage. And now? Logan was quiet for a moment. Now I realize she's been lying to everyone. To you, to me, to her parents. This isn't about a bad marriage. This is about her being selfish and dishonest. What are you going to do with that information? I don't know. She's my best friend. Or she was. I feel like I don't even know who she is anymore. Through the bedroom window, I could see Nessa gesturing frantically as she spoke on her phone. Her conversation with Mark was clearly not going well. Logan, can I ask you something? Sure. Has Nessa been talking about divorce? About leaving me? She's mentioned it. She said she was thinking about it, but she was worried about the financial implications. She asked me about lawyers, about how to protect her assets. When was this? About a month ago, right after she started talking about Mark more frequently. So Nessa had been planning her exit strategy for weeks. The affair wasn't just about emotional connection or physical attraction. It was about having a backup plan in place before she ended our marriage. Thank you for being honest with me, I said. Keaton, what are you going to do? I'm going to protect myself, and I'm going to make sure everyone knows the truth about what's been happening. Including her parents? I looked through the window at Walter and Janine, still absorbed in their board game, completely unaware that their daughter's marriage was imploding around them. Especially her parents. After I ended the call with Logan, I sat on the deck for a few minutes, listening to the rain and thinking about the next phase of my plan. Nessa had been counting on controlling the narrative, painting me as the villain while she played the victim of an unhappy marriage. But narratives could be changed when people had access to actual facts. My phone buzzed with a text from Mark. Your wife is a manipulative liar. She's been using both of us. I replied, Took you long enough to figure that out. A few minutes later, another message. She told me you were abusive, that she was afraid of you. Did she tell you I was paying for your apartment? What? Check the lease, check the payment records, ask her where she got the money for all those romantic dinners and weekend getaways. My phone rang immediately. Mark calling instead of texting. Are you saying she used your money to pay for our relationship? I'm saying you should ask her where the money came from, and while you're at it, ask her what she told her best friend about your future together. What do you mean? Ask her if she ever mentioned marriage. Ask her if she ever said she loved you. Ask her what her actual plans were for your relationship. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. She said she was going to leave you, Mark said finally. When? After the holidays. She said she wanted to get through Christmas with her family first. And then what? She was going to move in with you? You were going to get married? Another pause. We hadn't discussed specifics. Because there were no specifics. You were a distraction, Mark. A way for her to feel better about herself while she figured out how to end our marriage on her terms. You're lying. Am I? When was the last time she talked about your future together? When was the last time she made concrete plans that extended beyond the next hotel reservation? The line went quiet again. I could practically hear Mark's mental gears turning as he reconsidered every conversation he'd had with Nessa over the past few months. She's been playing both of us, I continued. The difference is, I figured it out first. Mark hung up without another word. Inside the cabin, I could hear raised voices from the bedroom. Nessa's phone conversation had turned into a full-blown argument. Walter and Janine looked up from their game with concern. Should we check on her? Janine asked. I'll go, I offered. I found Nessa sitting on the bed, her face flushed with anger and frustration. She'd ended her phone call, but she was staring at her device like it had personally betrayed her. Rough conversation? I asked. Mark is being completely unreasonable. He's blaming me for things that aren't my fault. Like what? Like the apartment situation, like the money issues. He thinks I somehow orchestrated all of this. Did you tell him I was abusive? She looked up sharply. What? Did you tell Mark that I was abusive? That you were afraid of me? Her face went pale. Who told you that? He did. He also told me about your plans to leave me after Christmas. Nessa stood up and walked to the window, her back to me. Those weren't definite plans. They were just possibilities we discussed. While you were using our joint accounts to finance your discussions. It wasn't like that. Then what was it like, Nessa? Help me understand. She turned around, and for the first time since this whole situation began, she looked genuinely vulnerable. I felt trapped, she said quietly. In our marriage, in my life. Everything felt routine and predictable. Mark made me feel alive again. So you decided to have an affair. I decided to explore my options. With our money. It wasn't supposed to go on this long. I was going to figure things out, make a decision about our future. And in the meantime, you'd keep both options open. She nodded reluctantly. What changed your mind about Mark? What do you mean? You're angry with him now. What did he do wrong? Nessa sat back down on the bed, suddenly looking exhausted. He's being selfish. When the apartment situation fell through, when the money got complicated, he started making demands. He wanted me to choose between you and him immediately. He said if I really loved him, I'd leave you right now, this weekend. And I realized he doesn't understand how complicated this is. He doesn't care about my relationship with my parents, or my financial security, or anything except what he wants. So you're disappointed that your backup plan turned out to be selfish? Don't say it like that. How should I say it? Before she could answer, there was a soft knock on the bedroom door. Kids? Walter's voice. Is everything okay in there? Nessa and I looked at each other. Her parents had heard at least part of our conversation. We're fine, Dad, Nessa called out. Just discussing some work stuff. Okay, lunch is ready when you are. As his footsteps retreated, Nessa turned back to me. What happens now? Now we go have lunch with your parents. And then? And then we drive home and figure out what's left of our marriage. Keaton, I want to try to work things out. I studied her face, looking for signs of genuine remorse or commitment. What I saw instead was calculation. She was realizing that her backup plan had fallen apart, and now she wanted to retreat to the safety of our marriage. Do you love Mark? I asked. I thought I did, but I was wrong about him. Do you love me? She hesitated just long enough to answer my question. I want to love you again, she said finally. That's not the same thing. It's a start. Maybe it was. But as we prepared to join her parents for lunch, I realized that starting over would require both of us to want the same thing, and I was no longer sure that Nessa and I wanted the same future. Outside, the rain was beginning to clear, but the storm inside our marriage was just getting started. The drive home from the lake cabin was conducted in almost complete silence. Walter and Janine, sensing the tension between Nessa and me, had tried to maintain light conversation for the first hour, but eventually even they gave up and settled into their own quiet discussions about retirement plans and upcoming holidays. Nessa stared out the passenger window, her phone dark and silent in her lap. She'd stopped checking it obsessively around noon after receiving what appeared to be a particularly upsetting message that had left her pale and shaken. I focused on driving and thinking about what came next. The weekend had clarified several things. Nessa's affair was over. Mark had made that clear in his final angry phone call to her. Her financial access to our joint accounts was suspended pending legal review, and her parents, while not yet aware of the full situation, were beginning to sense that something serious was wrong with their daughter's marriage. But knowing what had happened was different from knowing what to do about it. Can we drop you folks off first? I asked as we approached the outskirts of Cleveland. Of course, Walter replied. Thanks for driving, Keaton. No problem. 20 minutes later, we pulled into Walter and Janine's driveway. They gathered their bags and said their goodbyes, with Janine giving both Nessa and me extra long hugs. Take care of each other, she whispered to me as she embraced me. We will, I replied, though I wasn't sure that was true anymore. After her parents went inside, Nessa and I sat in the car for a moment without speaking. What now? She asked finally. Now we go home and have the conversation we should have had months ago. And then? And then we decide whether we're going to try to save this marriage or end it with whatever dignity we can manage. She nodded slowly. Okay. The drive to our house took 15 more minutes. As we pulled into our driveway, I noticed that our neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, was working in her front yard, raking leaves with obvious interest in our return. She waved cheerfully, and I waved back, wondering how long it would be before the entire neighborhood knew that the Marins' marriage was in trouble. Inside our house, everything looked exactly as we'd left it Friday morning. The same furniture, the same family photos on the mantelpiece, the same sense of comfortable domesticity that we'd built together over 15 years of marriage. But something fundamental had shifted, and I could feel it in the air like the charge before a thunderstorm. Do you want some coffee? Nessa asked, heading toward the kitchen. Sure. As she prepared the coffee, I sat at our kitchen table and thought about how many important conversations had happened in this room. Career decisions, family planning, financial choices, dreams for the future. This would be another one of those conversations, except this time we'd be talking about endings instead of beginnings. Here. Nessa set a mug in front of me and sat down across the table. We drank our coffee in silence for a few minutes, both of us seemingly reluctant to start the conversation that would determine our future. I'm sorry, she said finally. For which part? All of it. The lying, the money, the way I handled everything with Mark. Are you sorry it happened, or sorry you got caught? She considered the question seriously. Both, I think. I'm sorry I hurt you, but I'm also sorry I made such a mess of everything. What did you want from Mark? I wanted to feel desired again, appreciated, like I was someone's first choice instead of just a comfortable habit. Is that how you felt about our marriage, like you were just a habit? Sometimes. Don't you ever feel that way? I thought about it honestly. Yes, sometimes. But I thought that was normal after 15 years together. I thought it was something we could work on. I thought so too at first. But then Mark came back into my life, and suddenly I remembered what it felt like to be excited about someone. So you decided to have an affair instead of talking to me about our problems? I didn't decide to have an affair. It just happened gradually. Affairs don't just happen, Nessa. They're a series of choices. The choice to respond to his messages, the choice to meet him for coffee, the choice to rent an apartment where you could be alone together. She was quiet for a long time, staring down at her coffee mug. You're right, she said finally. I made those choices. And I made them without thinking about how they would affect you or our marriage. Why? Because I was selfish. Because I wanted something for myself, and I convinced myself that I deserved it. What about now? What do you want now? I want to fix this. I want to rebuild our marriage and make it better than it was before. Even though Mark is out of the picture? She looked up sharply. That's not why I want to fix things. Isn't it? If Mark hadn't turned out to be selfish and demanding, if your backup plan had worked out the way you hoped, would you be sitting here talking about rebuilding our marriage? I don't know, she admitted. Maybe not. At least she was being honest. Nessa, I need you to understand something. Trust isn't like a broken dish that you can glue back together and pretend it's the same as before. Once it's broken, it's broken. Even if we stay married, even if we work on our problems, I will never trust you the way I did before this happened. I understand that. Do you? Do you understand that every time you're late coming home from work, I'll wonder where you really were? Every time you get a text message, I'll wonder who it's from. Every time you say you love me, I'll remember that you were planning to leave me for another man? Tears started rolling down her cheeks. I understand. And do you understand that I've changed too? That I'm not the same person who would have believed your explanations and forgiven your mistakes without question? That version of me died when you flushed your wedding ring down the toilet. What does that mean? It means that if we're going to stay married, it's going to be a different kind of marriage, with different rules and different expectations. What kind of rules? I pulled out my phone and showed her a document I'd prepared during the drive home. Complete financial transparency. All accounts, all passwords, all purchases over $50 require discussion, no private social media accounts, no contact with Mark or anyone else who is involved in covering up your affair. Counseling, both individual and couples. And a post-nuptial agreement that protects both of us if this happens again. She read through the list carefully. This sounds like a business contract, not a marriage. Maybe that's what we need right now. Clear expectations instead of assumptions. And if I don't agree to these terms? Then we get divorced. We divide our assets according to Ohio law, we tell your parents the truth about why our marriage ended, and we both start over. Nessa was quiet for a long time, considering her options. Can I ask you something? She said finally. Sure. Do you still love me? I thought about the question seriously. Did I love the woman sitting across from me, or did I love the memory of who she used to be? I love who you were, I said finally. I'm not sure yet who you are now. That's fair. What about you? Do you love me? I want to. I want to love you the way I did when we first got married. But you don't right now. I don't know right now. Everything is so complicated and confusing. We finished our coffee in silence, both of us lost in our own thoughts about what came next. I need some time to think about your terms, Nessa said finally. How much time? A few days, maybe a week. Okay, but while you're thinking, you should know that I've already filed separation papers. They're not active yet, but they're ready to be submitted if we can't reach an agreement. Her face went pale. You're serious about this? I'm serious about protecting myself. I spent 3 weeks watching you plan to leave me while pretending everything was normal. I'm not going to make myself that vulnerable again. Where does that leave us right now? Right now, we're roommates. We sleep in separate bedrooms, we maintain separate social lives, and we don't make any major decisions together until we figure out whether we have a future. And if I decide I want to try to make this work, then we start counseling immediately. We sign the postnuptial agreement. We tell your parents what happened and why, and we see if we can build something new from what's left of our marriage. And if I decide I don't want to live under those conditions, then we proceed with the divorce, and we both move on with our lives. Nessa stood up from the table and walked to the kitchen window, looking out at our backyard where we'd hosted countless family barbecues and holiday gatherings. I never thought it would come to this, she said quietly. Neither did I. I really did love you, Keaton. I still do, in my own way. I know. But love isn't enough if it's not backed up by respect and commitment. She turned around to face me. What if I choose to fight for us? Then we fight together, but we fight honestly this time, with all our cards on the table. And what if I choose not to fight? Then we end this marriage with dignity and respect, and we both find happiness somewhere else. Nessa nodded slowly. I'll let you know my decision by Friday. Okay. As she headed upstairs to what would now be her separate bedroom, I remained at the kitchen table, thinking about the conversation we just had. It wasn't the conversation I'd imagined having when I'd first discovered her affair 3 weeks ago. Back then, I'd thought this would be about anger and betrayal and dramatic confrontations. Instead, it had been about choices and consequences and the recognition that sometimes love isn't enough to save a marriage that's been fundamentally damaged. I looked around our kitchen, with its family photos and shared memories and evidence of 15 years of building a life together. By Friday, I'd know whether any of it was worth saving. Outside, Mrs. Henderson was still raking leaves, and I could see her glancing toward our house with obvious curiosity. Soon enough, she and the rest of the neighborhood would know that the Marins were getting divorced. But for now, we still had a few more days to pretend that our marriage might survive this storm. I just wasn't sure either of us believed that anymore. Friday afternoon arrived gray and cold, with the kind of November weather that makes you want to stay inside and avoid making important decisions. But important decisions don't wait for perfect conditions, and Nessa had promised to give me her answer by the end of the week. I'd spent the previous 4 days working from home, partly to give us both space to think, and partly because I didn't trust myself to maintain professional composure while my personal life hung in the balance. Nessa had gone to work each day as usual, but our interactions at home had been polite and distant, like strangers sharing a hotel room. She'd asked for time to consider my terms, and I'd given it to her. But I'd also spent those 4 days preparing for both possible outcomes. If she chose to fight for our marriage, I'd already scheduled appointments with counselors and attorneys to begin the process of rebuilding. If she chose to walk away, I'd prepared the paperwork to make our separation as clean and dignified as possible. Either way, I was ready. At 6 o'clock, I heard her car pull into the driveway. She'd been working late all week, whether to avoid our conversation or to handle actual work responsibilities, I wasn't sure. But tonight was different. Tonight, she was coming home to deliver her decision. I was sitting in the living room when she came inside, still wearing her professional attire and carrying the briefcase that had become a symbol of her independence and ambition. "Hi," she said, setting down her bag. "Hi, how was work?" "Busy, but good." She sat down on the opposite end of the couch, maintaining the physical distance that had characterized our interactions all week. "We need to talk." "I know. I've made my decision." I waited, studying her face for clues about which direction she'd chosen. She looked tired, but resolved, like someone who'd wrestled with a difficult choice and finally reached a conclusion she could live with. "I want to try to save our marriage," she said finally. "I want to accept your terms and see if we can build something new together." I felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. Relief because it meant we wouldn't have to go through the painful process of divorce. Apprehension because I wasn't sure either of us really understood what we were committing to. "Are you sure?" I asked. "Because once we start this process, there's no going back to the way things were before." "I'm sure. I've spent all week thinking about what I want my life to look like, and I want it to include you. Not the way we were before, but something better." "What changed your mind?" She was quiet for a moment, considering her answer. "I talked to my sister. I talked to Logan. I talked to my therapist. And I realized that running away from our problems isn't going to solve anything. If I can't make this marriage work, I probably can't make any relationship work." "This isn't about proving something to other people, Nessa. This is about whether you genuinely want to be married to me." "I do want to be married to you. I want to remember why I fell in love with you 15 years ago, and I want to fall in love with who you are now. Even with all the new rules and restrictions? Even with those, I understand why you need them, and I'm willing to live with them if it means we get a chance to rebuild trust." I looked at her carefully, searching for signs of reluctance or resentment. What I saw instead was something I hadn't seen in months: genuine vulnerability and hope. "Okay," I said finally. "Then we start tomorrow." "What happens tomorrow?" "We meet with a counselor I've already contacted. We open new joint bank accounts with complete transparency. We sign the post-nuptial agreement, and we tell your parents what happened." Her face went pale at the mention of her parents. "Do we have to tell them everything?" "We have to tell them enough so they understand why our marriage went through a crisis and what we're doing to fix it." "They're going to be so disappointed in me." "Probably, but they love you, and they'll support our decision to work on our marriage." "What if they don't?" "Then we deal with that together, as a team." Nessa nodded slowly. "Okay, I can do this." "Are you sure? Because the next few months are going to be harder than anything we've been through so far. Counseling is going to force us to examine every aspect of our relationship. The financial transparency is going to feel invasive, and rebuilding trust is going to require constant effort from both of us." "I understand." "And you're willing to do all of that?" "I'm willing to try." I stood up and walked to the kitchen, returning with a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. "Then I think we should mark this moment somehow." "What are you doing?" "I'm acknowledging that our old marriage is officially over, and we're about to begin something entirely new." I poured wine for both of us and handed her a glass. "To new beginnings," I said, raising my glass. "To new beginnings," she echoed. We drank in silence for a few minutes, both of us seemingly aware that we'd just crossed a threshold that would determine the rest of our lives. "Can I ask you something?" Nessa said finally. "Sure." "Do you think we can really make this work?" "I think we can if we're both completely honest about what we want and what we're willing to sacrifice to get it." "And what do you want?" "I want a marriage based on mutual respect and genuine partnership. I want to trust my wife completely, and I want her to trust me the same way. I want us to be each other's first choice, not each other's backup plan." "And what are you willing to sacrifice?" "I'm willing to sacrifice the illusion that love is enough by itself. I'm willing to sacrifice the comfortable assumption that our marriage will survive without constant effort, and I'm willing to sacrifice my pride if it means we can build something better than what we had before." "What do you want from me?" "I want complete honesty, even when it's uncomfortable. I want you to choose our marriage every day, not just when your other options fall through. And I want you to help me trust you again, even though that's going to take time and patience." Nessa set down her wine glass and moved closer to me on the couch. "I want those things too." "Even though it means giving up your independence?" "I'm not giving up my independence. I'm choosing to share my life with you in a more intentional way." "That's a good way to think about it." We finished our wine and spent the next hour talking about practical details: the counseling schedule, the financial arrangements, the conversation with her parents. It felt strange to be planning the reconstruction of our marriage with the same methodical approach we'd used to plan our kitchen renovation 2 years ago, but maybe that's what mature love looked like: less passion and spontaneity, more deliberate choices, and careful construction. "I have something for you," Nessa said, reaching into her purse. She pulled out a small jewelry box and handed it to me. "What's this?" "Open it." Inside the box was a new wedding ring, not identical to the one she'd flushed down the toilet, but similar enough to represent the same commitment. I bought it yesterday, she said, after I decided I wanted to fight for us. Nessa, I know it doesn't erase what I did, and I know you might not be ready to put it on my finger again, but I wanted you to know that I'm serious about this commitment. I looked at the ring, thinking about the symbolism of circles and promises and second chances. Are you ready to wear it? I asked, if you're ready to give it to me. I took the ring out of the box and held it up to the light. It caught the reflection of our living room lamps, sparkling with the promise of new beginnings and hard-earned wisdom. This doesn't mean everything is forgiven, I said. I know. And it doesn't mean we're back to where we were before. I know that too. But it means we're willing to try. Yes. I reached for her left hand and slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made specifically for this moment of redemption and hope. There, I said. Now we're officially married again. She laughed through tears I hadn't noticed her crying. That's not how marriage works. Maybe not, but it's how our marriage works now. We held hands on the couch, both of us staring at the new ring on her finger and thinking about what came next. Tomorrow would bring counseling sessions and difficult conversations and the hard work of rebuilding trust. But tonight, we were just two people who'd decided that their love was worth fighting for, even after it had been damaged by betrayal and poor choices. Thank you, Nessa said quietly. For what? For being willing to try again, for not giving up on us when it would have been easier to walk away. Thank you for choosing to fight, even after everything I did, especially after everything you did. It would have been easier for you to start over with someone new than to do the hard work of fixing what we broke. We sat together in comfortable silence as the evening grew dark outside our windows. Mrs. Henderson's house across the street glowed with warm light, and I could see her family gathered around their dinner table, sharing their Friday evening meal. Soon, that would be us again. Not the same as before, but something new, and hopefully stronger. What do we do now? Nessa asked. Now we go to bed, in separate rooms like we agreed, and tomorrow we start the real work. How long do you think it will take? I don't know. Maybe months, maybe years, maybe the rest of our lives. Are you okay with that? I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not just the woman who'd betrayed me, but also the woman who'd chosen to fight for our future together despite having every opportunity to walk away. Yeah, I said finally. I'm okay with that. As we turned off the lights and headed upstairs to our separate bedrooms, I thought about the ring that had started this whole crisis. Somewhere in the Cleveland municipal water system, my original wedding ring was probably sitting at the bottom of a treatment facility, just another piece of discarded metal in the endless flow of human waste and forgotten promises. But here in our house, on Nessa's finger, a new ring was beginning a different story. A story about second chances and hard-earned wisdom and the recognition that love, by itself, isn't enough to sustain